For all that celebrations are magnificent, at the heart of the pageantry is a simple message: service.
What happens when loyalty collides with protocol inside the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace? When does a single sentence become a declaration of war within the royal family? And how far will Prince William go to defend the woman he considers the backbone of the British monarchy? Behind closed doors at Windsor Castle, something unprecedented unfolded. Something that would test the boundaries of family, duty, and the unspoken rules that have governed the royal family for generations. What began as a celebration turned into a confrontation that palace insiders are calling the most tense moment in recent royal history. This isn't about tabloid gossip or manufactured drama. This is about respect, sacrifice, and what happens when someone crosses a line that cannot be uncrossed. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on an incident that has sent shockwaves through the House of Windsor. An incident involving Meghan Markle, Princess Anne, and a prince who refused to stay silent. Are you ready to discover what really happened? Because the truth is more explosive than anyone anticipated. The setup. For decades, Princess Anne has been the monarchy's most reliable soldier. While others sought the spotlight, she worked in the shadows. While others counted their appearances, she simply appeared again and again and again. Over 20,000 royal engagements. Let that number sink in. 20,000 times she has shown up, shaken hands, cut ribbons, championed causes, and represented the crown without complaint or fanfare. But recognition? That's a different story. Anne has been called outdated, old-fashioned, too stern, not warm enough. The criticisms have followed her like shadows, yet she has pressed forward with a determination that borders on superhuman. To those who truly understand the monarchy, Anne represents something increasingly rare: duty without ego, service without seeking reward. Prince William has always understood this about his aunt. From childhood, he watched her compete in equestrian events with fierce determination. As he grew into his role, he observed how she navigated the impossible balance between tradition and modernity, never compromising her core principles. In Anne, William saw what royalty should be: consistent, hardworking, and utterly devoted to something larger than oneself. So when Windsor Castle prepared to celebrate Anne's latest milestone, 20,000 engagements of tireless service, the atmosphere should have been purely celebratory. The guest list was intimate, mostly family and close supporters of Anne's extensive charity work, particularly her decades-long association with Save the Children. William arrived that evening with Kate, expecting nothing more than an opportunity to honor his aunt. He had prepared brief remarks about Anne's influence on his own approach to duty. Kate had selected a meaningful gift, a private gesture, acknowledging Anne's mentorship. The mood was warm, appreciative, exactly as it should have been. But someone else was there that evening, someone whose presence would transform celebration into confrontation. Meghan Markle had made an unexpected appearance. The gathering storm. Now, Meghan's attendance alone wasn't unusual. Despite the well-documented tensions between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family, certain events still drew everyone together. This was one of those occasions where absence would have been more notable than presence. Protocol demanded attendance. Family obligation required it. What no one anticipated was what Meghan would say. The evening had been progressing smoothly. Anne, in her characteristic way, was downplaying her achievement, redirecting attention toward the charities she supported rather than accepting praise for herself. She spoke about children in crisis, about international development work, about the importance of showing up consistently rather than making grand gestures. It was vintage Anne, humble, focused, entirely unconcerned with personal glory. Meghan had been standing in a small circle near the main reception area. She was engaged in conversation with several guests, discussing modern approaches to royal duties, social media engagement, and the evolution of public service in the digital age. The conversation itself wasn't problematic, but then, almost casually, Meghan made a comment that would shatter the evening's tranquility. According to multiple sources who were close enough to hear, Meghan suggested that Anne's approach to royal duty while admirable in its own time, represented an outdated model that younger generations couldn't relate to. She implied that in today's world, visibility and connection mattered more than sheer volume of appearances. She used words like performative and disconnected, suggesting that Anne's style belonged to a bygone era. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Several guests froze mid-conversation. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Eyes darted nervously around the room. Did she really just say that? Here, tonight, at an event specifically honoring the very work she was dismissing? But Meghan, seemingly unaware of the impact of her words, continued. She spoke about how she and Harry had tried to modernize royal engagement, to make it more meaningful and less mechanical. The implication was clear. What Anne had been doing for 50 years was mechanical, less meaningful, insufficient for contemporary times. Somewhere across the room, Princess Anne heard every word. The royal who never breaks. If you know anything about Princess Anne, you know she doesn't break easily. This is a woman who once handled an attempted kidnapping with remarkable composure, telling her would-be abductor, "Not bloody likely," when he ordered her out of her car. This is someone who was thrown from a horse during an Olympic competition and simply got back on. Anne has weathered criticism, scandal, and personal heartbreak with the same stoic determination. But this was different. This wasn't media speculation or public criticism from strangers. This was within the family circle, at an event meant to honor her, from someone who had spent considerable energy positioning herself as a modernizer of the monarchy. The insult, delivered with casual confidence, struck at the very foundation of Anne's identity. Those who know Anne well noticed the subtle shift. Her shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. Her lips pressed together in a thin line. Her eyes, usually warm when discussing her charity work, turned cold and distant. But she didn't respond. She didn't lash out. She simply continued her conversation, redirecting attention to a story about a recent visit to a children's hospital in Southeast Asia. This is how Anne has survived decades in the public eye, by absorbing blows and moving forward, by refusing to give critics the satisfaction of a visible reaction, by maintaining composure when others might crumble. But someone else in that room was not nearly as practiced in royal restraint. Prince William had been standing near enough to hear Meghan's comments, and unlike his aunt, William's reaction was immediate and visible. His jaw clenched, his fists tightened at his sides. His entire posture shifted from relaxed to battle-ready in seconds. For William, this wasn't just about defending his aunt. This was about defending everything the monarchy stands for. Because if Anne's brand of service, unglamorous, consistent, ego-free, could be dismissed as outdated and performative, then what did that say about the institution itself? What did it say about his own future as king? More personally, William has always held Anne in the highest regard. She represents a standard he aspires to: work without seeking credit, duty without demanding recognition. To hear someone criticize that, someone who had spent far less time in service, who had ultimately chosen to step away from royal duties entirely, was more than William could tolerate silently. Kate, standing beside him, gently touched his arm. She recognized the warning signs, the tension in his shoulders, the sharp focus of his gaze. She had seen William angry before, but rarely in public, and never at a family event. She whispered something meant to calm him, but William's attention was locked on Meghan, who continued speaking, seemingly oblivious to the storm she had created. The question wasn't whether William would respond. The question was how. The heir's anger. What happened next depends on who you ask. Some witnesses say William simply walked away, removing himself from the situation before he said something he couldn't take back. Others insist he approached Meghan directly, his words quiet, but unmistakably sharp. A few claim he immediately went to Anne, positioning himself protectively beside his aunt for the remainder of the evening. What everyone agrees on is this: William's fury was palpable and impossible to ignore. The prince who has spent his entire life training to manage emotions in public, who has navigated impossible family dynamics with measured responses, who has learned to smile through discomfort and deflect through charm, couldn't hide his anger that night. And perhaps he didn't want to, because sometimes silence sends the wrong message. Sometimes, maintaining composure in the face of disrespect signals that the disrespect is acceptable. And for William, what Meghan said about Anne was absolutely unacceptable. Consider William's position in that moment. He's the future king, responsible for preserving the monarchy's dignity and unity. He's also a nephew who deeply loves and respects his aunt. He's caught between protocol, which demands he stay calm, and loyalty, which demands he defend someone who has given everything to the institution he will one day lead. According to palace insiders, William made his choice quickly. He wasn't going to let this pass unremarked. One source close to the family reports that William pulled Meghan aside, away from the main gathering, and told her plainly that her comments were inappropriate and hurtful. He reportedly said that whatever disagreements existed about royal duties, tonight was not the night to air them, and Anne was not the target to choose. Another account suggests William's response was even more direct. He allegedly told Meghan that if she couldn't respect the people who had devoted their lives to the crown, perhaps she shouldn't attend events meant to honor them. Meghan's reaction? That's where accounts diverge even further. Some say she was taken aback, not realizing her words had caused such offense. She apparently attempted to clarify, insisting she meant no personal disrespect to Anne, only that the world had changed and royal duties needed to evolve with it. Others claim Meghan stood her ground, defending her position that modernization was necessary and that honest conversation about royal methods shouldn't be considered taboo. But William wasn't interested in debate. This wasn't about strategy or PR or generational differences in approach. This was about his aunt, who had earned respect through decades of selfless work, being dismissed by someone who had barely begun to understand what royal service truly meant. The aftermath. The rest of the evening played out under a cloud of tension that no amount of royal training could fully disguise. Conversations continued, but they felt strained. Smiles were exchanged, but they didn't quite reach anyone's eyes. Anne herself tried to salvage the mood, sharing anecdotes and thanking supporters, but even her best efforts couldn't erase what had happened. Kate, ever the diplomat, spent much of the evening trying to smooth tensions. She made a point of speaking warmly with both Anne and Meghan, attempting to bridge the divide through sheer force of grace. But even Kate's considerable skills couldn't fully repair the damage. When the evening finally ended, people left quickly. There was none of the usual lingering, no extended goodbyes or plans for future gatherings. Everyone simply wanted to escape the awkwardness. But the real drama was only beginning. The next morning, William requested a private meeting with Anne. This wasn't unusual. They spoke regularly about royal duties and family matters. But this conversation had a different purpose. William needed to know if Anne was all right. More than that, he needed her to know that he would not allow anyone, regardless of their position in the family, to disrespect her. They met at Anne's residence at Gatcombe Park. The Princess Royal, true to form, tried to downplay the entire incident. "You get used to it, William," she reportedly said. "People always think they know what this job should be." But William wouldn't let it go. He pressed Anne, reminding her of everything she had sacrificed, the holidays spent working instead of relaxing, the international tours that took her away from her family for weeks at a time, the endless days filled with back-to-back engagements that earned little attention but built the monarchy's reputation brick by brick. "You've given everything," William told her, "and no one gets to diminish that, especially not someone who chose to walk away." Those last words revealed the depth of William's feelings, because this wasn't just about defending Anne anymore. It was about the fundamental question of commitment. Anne had stayed, through scandals, through personal difficulties, through changing times and shifting public opinion. She had stayed and worked and served. Meghan had left, and now, from her position of departure, she was criticizing those who remained. To William, that was indefensible. Anne, showing the wisdom of her years, counseled restraint. She reminded William that reacting often gave more power to hurtful comments. She had learned long ago that the best response to criticism was continued work, not confrontation. But William had a different view, shaped by a different era. He had grown up watching how quickly private moments became public scandals, how a single comment could snowball into a narrative that defined months of coverage. He worried that if Meghan's remarks found their way into wider circulation, they could be twisted into a story about generational conflict within the royal family, about old methods versus new, about the monarchy's relevance in modern Britain. To William, silence wasn't strength, it was risk. The family divides. News of the confrontation naturally didn't stay contained. Within days, the story had circulated through the palace's inner circles. Staff members exchanged concerned glances. Private secretaries compared notes. Everyone who had been present that night had their own version of events, and those versions began to spread. King Charles found himself in an impossible position. As a father, he understood William's protective instincts. As Anne's brother, he appreciated her decades of service. But he also understood the broader implications of family conflict becoming public. The monarchy's strength had always relied on its appearance of unity. Internal divisions, when exposed, became weapons for critics who questioned the institution's continued relevance. Charles called for a private family meeting. It was held at Buckingham Palace, in one of the smaller drawing rooms away from the grand state chambers. The guest list was deliberately limited: William, Kate, Anne, Charles, Camilla, Harry, and Meghan. The atmosphere was tense from the moment everyone arrived. William and Harry, whose relationship had been strained for years, barely acknowledged each other. Meghan looked composed, but guarded. Anne maintained her characteristic stoicism. Kate tried to project calm. Charles, caught between his roles as father, brother, and king, looked weary. Charles began by reminding everyone of their shared responsibility to the crown. He spoke about how the monarchy's survival depended on their ability to present unity, even when they disagreed privately. He acknowledged that families have conflicts, but he stressed that their family's conflicts had unique consequences. Then, he turned to the incident at Anne's celebration. William spoke first, his words measured but firm. He explained that he wasn't trying to create drama or extend conflict. He was simply defending someone who deserved respect, someone who had earned it through 50 years of service. He made it clear that he wasn't attacking Meghan personally, but he couldn't remain silent when his aunt was insulted. Meghan responded, and this is where the meeting reportedly became heated. She insisted, again, that she hadn't intended to insult Anne personally. She explained that she was making a broader point about how royal duties needed to evolve to remain relevant. She argued that honest conversations about modernization shouldn't be interpreted as attacks on individuals. But William pushed back hard. "This wasn't a policy discussion," he reportedly said. "This was my aunt's celebration. You criticized her work at an event meant to honor it. That's not modernization. That's disrespect." The room fell silent. Anne, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. She thanked William for his loyalty, but urged everyone to move past the incident. She reminded them that the public was watching, waiting for any sign of division. She suggested that the best response was to return to work, to demonstrate through their actions what the monarchy stood for. It was a gracious intervention, classic Anne, but it didn't resolve the underlying tensions, because the conflict wasn't really about one comment at one event. It was about deeper questions that had been simmering for years. Questions about what royal service means in the 21st century. Questions about whether the institution can evolve without abandoning its core principles. Questions about who gets to define what counts as meaningful work. And most personally, questions about whether Harry and Meghan's departure meant they had forfeited the right to critique those who stayed. The deeper meaning. To understand why this incident cut so deeply, you have to understand what Princess Anne represents to William and to the institution itself. Anne is the anti-celebrity royal. In an age where visibility often equals value, where social media presence drives relevance, where personal brand matters as much as actual work, Anne represents a completely different model. She does the work without seeking the credit. She shows up without demanding applause. She serves without building a personal following. And for 50 years, that model has worked, not in terms of headlines or trending topics or Instagram followers, but in terms of actual impact. The charities Anne supports have thrived. The organizations she champions have grown. The causes she advocates for have advanced. She has built relationships with communities around the world, not through photo opportunities but through consistent, repeated engagement over decades. To William, this is what royalty should be: service as an end in itself, not as a means to popularity or influence. Duty performed because it's right, not because it's rewarding. When Meghan criticized Anne's approach as outdated, she wasn't just critiquing a method, she was challenging a philosophy. And that philosophy is the foundation of William's own vision for the monarchy, because William knows he will be king someday. He has spent his entire life preparing for that responsibility, and as he has watched the institution evolve, he has become increasingly convinced that its survival depends on returning to core principles, not abandoning them for whatever seems relevant in the moment. He looks at Anne and sees sustainability, someone who has worked at the same pace, with the same dedication for 50 years. No burnout, no drama, no need for breaks or new directions or personal fulfillment outside the role. Just steady, consistent service. He looks at Meghan and Harry's approach, the focus on impact over volume, on selected causes over broad engagement, on personal well-being over institutional demands, and he sees something less sustainable, something that might generate more attention in the short term, but doesn't provide the stable, reliable presence the monarchy needs. This isn't about whether one approach is objectively better than the other. It's about what works for an institution that measures success in centuries, not news cycles. And when Meghan criticized Anne, she was essentially telling William that his own vision for the future was wrong, that the example he had chosen to follow was inadequate, that the aunt he admired most had wasted 50 years on an outdated model. Of course, he was furious. The question of respect. But there's another layer to this conflict, one that's even more personal and more painful for William. It's about respect, about who has earned the right to critique royal service and who hasn't. Princess Anne has devoted her entire life to the crown. She has made sacrifices that most people cannot imagine. She has put duty before personal happiness, before family time, before rest and relaxation, and all the things that most people consider basic human needs. She has done this not for a few years, not during a particularly intense period, but for 5 decades without break. Meghan, in contrast, was a working royal for less than 2 years. She joined the family in 2018 and stepped back from official duties in 2020. In that brief window, she completed hundreds of engagements, launched initiatives, and brought attention to important causes. But she also found the experience difficult, oppressive, and ultimately unbearable. William doesn't fault Meghan for finding royal life challenging. He understands, probably better than most, how demanding it can be. The constant scrutiny, the lack of privacy, the endless expectations, the rigid protocols. These things take a toll. But he does fault her for criticizing someone who has endured all those same challenges for 50 years without complaint. Because that's what respect means in William's view. You earn the right to critique through your own sustained commitment. You demonstrate understanding through your own sacrifice. You show you know what you're talking about by actually doing the work, not for a year or two, but for decades. And Meghan, in his eyes, hasn't earned that right. She left. She chose her own well-being, her own happiness, her own vision for her life over the demands of royal duty. William doesn't condemn that choice. In fact, he probably understands it more than anyone. The burden of being born into this life, of having no choice about your role, of knowing you can never leave. He carries that weight every day. But having made that choice to leave, Meghan no longer has the standing to critique those who stayed. She opted out of the very system she was criticizing. She removed herself from the challenges that Anne has faced for 50 years. And from that position of removal, she offered judgment on someone who has given everything. To William, that's not just disrespectful. It's insulting. It's presumptuous. It suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of what royal service actually requires. Conclusion. So where does this leave the royal family? Princess Anne continues her work, undeterred by controversy, unburdened by the need for recognition. She has 50 years of experience managing criticism and dismissal. This incident, painful as it may have been, is just another chapter in a long story of service. William carries his anger and his loyalty forward, more determined than ever to honor Anne's example. He has learned that sometimes standing up for principle creates more tension in the short term, but establishes important boundaries for the future. He won't apologize for defending his aunt, and he won't pretend that all approaches to royal duty are equally valid. Meghan and Harry remain on the outside, pursuing their own vision of service and impact. Whether they understand why their words caused such offense is unclear. Whether they regret the comment is unknown. What is clear is that the gulf between them and the rest of the family has widened, perhaps irreparably. King Charles continues trying to hold everything together, playing mediator between competing visions and wounded feelings. It's a role he never wanted, but one he cannot escape. The unity of his family and the survival of the institution he now leads depend on his ability to bridge these divides. Kate works quietly in the background, offering grace where others offer judgment, building bridges where others build walls. She understands that the monarchy's future depends not on winning arguments, but on maintaining relationships. And the British public? They remain largely unaware of these tensions. They see the smiling faces at public events, the coordinated appearances, the messages of unity. They don't know about the anger that simmers beneath, the hurt that lingers, the divisions that threaten. But they sense something in the way William and Harry avoid each other, in the careful spacing at family events, in the words that are spoken and the words that are conspicuously absent. They sense that all is not well in the House of Windsor. What this incident ultimately reveals is that the royal family, for all its centuries of tradition and protocol, is still a family, with all the complexity, pain, loyalty, and conflict that families everywhere experience. The difference is that their conflicts play out on a global stage, with implications that extend far beyond personal relationships. When Meghan insulted Princess Anne, she crossed a line that William could not ignore, not because he's inflexible or unwilling to hear criticism, but because some people have earned protection through their sacrifices, and some values are worth defending even when it's uncomfortable. The question now is whether these wounds can heal, whether the family can find a way forward that honors both tradition and evolution, whether William's vision and Harry's vision can somehow coexist, even if they never fully agree, or whether this incident is just one more crack in a foundation that is slowly, inexorably breaking apart. Only time will tell. But one thing is certain: Princess Anne will continue her work, William will continue defending her, and the question of what the monarchy should be in the 21st century remains very much unanswered. What do you think? Was William right to defend his aunt so forcefully, or should he have followed Anne's example and let the comment pass without response? Can the royal family bridge these competing visions of service? And what does this conflict reveal about the monarchy's future? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this deep dive into royal dynamics revealing, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more analysis of the stories behind the headlines. Because the truth is always more complex than it appears, and understanding what really drives these conflicts helps us see the royal family not as characters in a drama, but as real people navigating impossible situations. Thank you for watching. And remember, in the world of royalty, what isn't said is often more important than what is.